Okay, so thank you for coming. Oh, sure. I was going to start first.
Did you want to say something?
No, no, not at all.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Ng's defense, or his PhD defense for his dissertation. I will talk about it for a moment. I will talk about the dissertation, but first I want to introduce you to the committee members who have been here and will be evaluating his defense today. So first, I'd like to welcome our external reader and committee member, Dr. James Nolan. I'm going to just read some of this for both James and Craig, Dr. Nolan and Dr. Chalquist. Since 2006, Dr. Nolan has served as the president of Southwestern College, a fully accredited graduate institution for counseling and art therapy. As part of his passion for this exciting new era, he is almost completely responsible for the creation and upkeep of the school's social media presence. Additionally, he is a personal coach, a VIP blogger, and a teacher, both brick and mortar and online. He has blogged extensively on social media and higher education for the Huffington Post. Previously, he held positions as the Director of Training for Walden University, Director of Health and Counseling Services at Baldwin Wallace College, Staff Psychologist for the University of Texas at Austin, and among many other university positions. And so I would like to welcome him and thank you so much for being an external.
I'm so honored to be here. Thank you.
And I'd like to introduce to you somebody who you all already know, Craig Chalquist. Craig is Department Chair of the East-West Psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies. He is also an adjunct faculty at the Pacific Graduate Institute, where he teaches ecopsychology. He is the author of several books, including those of the Animate California Trilogy and Terrapsychology, Re-Engaging the Soul of Place, editor of Rebirths. That's a beautiful title. It's Rebirth, E-A-R-T-H, Rebirths. Conversations with the World and Soul, and co-editor of Ecotherapy, Healing with Nature in Mind. He manages the Deep Educator Network at LinkedIn, and his website is chalquist.com. So thank you, Craig, for being here for us. And I'm Peter's chair. My name is Carol Whitfield, and I'm part of the East-West Psychology program. Chair for Peter. So Peter, let me just say a couple of words to introduce you. The title, I don't have it up on here, so I'll read it for you. The title for Peter's dissertation is Piercing the Veil of Learned Helplessness, an Integrated Transpersonal Model of Addiction. I feel as probably you'll get a chance to know, and hopefully this text will be published in the future. It is a thorough review and analysis of the whole addiction models that have been we've been held by for the last more than decades. And also very much taken for granted, especially the AA model, which I think everybody really assumes is the model, the most effective model there is in the world, all of these type of things. These are conditionings that we've accepted. Peter actually does a thorough investigation and analysis of this and makes a case for putting that in a sense. I'll let Peter tell you this in a better way than I can do, but putting this putting it aside, analyzing it, and perhaps putting it aside and looking at a more transpersonal, more integrated model of addiction that is really more inclusive of all human beings, whatever their religion or spirituality or non-spirituality may be, and something that is also broader in terms of the areas of a human being's life that really need to be taken into account if someone is going to be successfully tackle this incredible problem of addiction. And it's a masterful work. I can see certainly it being published. I see that it can be made into small articles. I'm extraordinarily impressed with the work, and I see how he can actually take this and move on to maybe some more qualitative type of work to substantiate this theoretical dissertation, which I'm going to turn over to him now so that he can spend, 45 minutes at least. I say good 45 minutes. We'll give you Peter.
Oh, that's more than enough.
Yeah, to really expand on the wonder of this work. There's an incredible work. He is so well researched, and he has something new to offer. So I hope you'll all be as impressed with it as I certainly am. Okay, Peter.
Yeah. So I came across this quote during my research, and I just thought it was a fascinating quote. At the end of the dissertation I handed in, I said that this is something that we as a field should investigate. Why is it that a country that recognizes addiction as a disease and uses spirituality to treat this disease, well, how did this happen? Why is it that so many people are incarcerated for it? In fact, there's more people incarcerated in the United States than Russia and China, I suspect, combined. Right? It's a very strange thing that's occurred. But it only came to me a few days ago as to why, partially the reason why this is so. And to be honest, I've been complicit in this, right? Through adherence to the current models of addiction, right? And I'll try to explain this. So if this isn't clear by the end of by the end of my defense, why this is so, please remind me, and I'll make it very clear. But I have to admit that I'm complicit. I've been complicit in this. I'm happening. Okay. So in the beginning, I want to set aside some very quick key terms so I don't lose anybody. Right. At first, when I started writing this, I thought, oh my God, I have to describe what addiction is. Right. But actually, I don't have to. I can just pull any definition out of a hat. It'll basically say there's no single and unambiguous definition for addiction. So whatever you have in mind is good enough. Okay. So we'll just take one out of the hat and say a syndrome at the center of which is impaired control over a reward-seeking, usually substance-taking behavior. It's good enough for me. Okay. There's a few other terms. Efficacy, right? Efficacy is when I have a treatment and I test it in laboratory settings against other treatments, right? So it's in a controlled setting, right? Efficacy. So how efficacious a pill is depends on, right, the experiment I did within laboratory parameters. Effectiveness means how effective it is outside of the laboratory parameters, right? Outside of testing. And then there's also transpersonal psychology and AA 12-step groups. Transpersonal psychology is my chosen field. It's a fourth force of psychology behind the psychoanalytical, behavioral, humanistic, and then you have transpersonal. Transpersonal psychology is a reflective study of transcendent experiences and its practical application to healing. So in a nutshell, it's where the intersection of psychology and spirituality meet. Okay, simple. And it was founded in 1969, so it's a relatively new field. Well, psychology is also relatively new, but transpersonal is the last major. No, I can't really say it because it's positive psychology. I just remembered. But transpersonal psychology is a self-professed fourth force of psychology, and it studies spirituality. Okay. Alcoholics Anonymous, right, is a fellowship. Well, it's okay if I read this. It's very quick. I'm not going to do this throughout the whole dissertation, but I just wanted to be. It's a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for a membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees, etc., etc. So it's a group of people, right, who gather together in 1-hour meetings all across America, all across America. They claim to have millions of members, right, for the purpose of helping people stop their drinking. And so using the Alcoholics Anonymous model, it spawned a lot of other 12-step groups, right? There's 12-step groups for smoking, sex, and other forms of addictive behavior, right? It's a huge institution. Okay, oh my gosh, this is too small. But the main point about Alcoholics Anonymous, and if I had to find a short description that would explain everything, right? The main driving force behind Alcoholics Anonymous is this: a description of the alcoholic, chapters to agnostics, and a personal adventures before and after make clear three pertinent ideas. These are the three central ideas of Alcoholics Anonymous: that we were alcoholics and could not manage our own lives, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism, that God could and would if he were sought. Okay, so let's think about what it's saying, right? What it's saying is that alcoholism is an incurable disease, and that there's only one chance and one chance only: God. Right? Okay. Okay. The primary objectives of my research was to determine whether transpersonal theory can further our knowledge of how addiction can be treated, whether we can use the major theories of transpersonal psychology and apply them to another area of human health, and use them as a theoretical sort of basis for healing, for mental healing. Okay. And we also have a need for spiritual alternatives. Alcoholics Anonymous is by far the most used modality in the treatment of addiction in the United States. In 1995, it was estimated that there were 96% of treatment centers used AA, right? The most recent tally was 2005, but by then it had dropped to about 76%. So when we talk about recovery from addiction, AA becomes synonymous, right? In North America. So, in effect, I wanted to use my research to try and see if there was a spiritual alternative for reasons that I'll explain throughout this defense. But the first, I came across this quote from a man named Nicholas Boving, and he kind of mirrored how I felt about the treatment environment. Right? Nicholas Boving, to his credit, he wrote an anti-AA article, and I found it under Pastoral Care magazine, of all places. Right? So I just thought that was remarkable. So his frustration stems from right, being told it's an incurable disease, and that the only way out is basically Protestant Christianity, right? But he's saying that he's estranged from this, from this religion. So where is he going to go? Okay, so my primary goal was to create a new model, an updated, effective, theoretically consistent, and integrated transpersonal model of addiction that extends from our current transpersonal model, and I'll get to that in a second. At the core of this model lies transpersonal change that is beyond individuality, beyond the development of the individual person. It is something which is more inclusive than the individual person, or which is bigger than he is. And that's what Maslow said is the essence of transpersonal change, right? Something that can expand us, that is, but spiritually, but is also different from AA. Why would I want to do something different from AA? And I'll explain it throughout the course of this work. Okay. So why? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Well, I've had a lifelong personal interest in this, and if you read my dissertation, I explain some of my personal experiences, right? I grew dissatisfied with the current treatment environment, right? I had the opportunity to investigate. I was going to go investigate a gamut of treatment options, running from the really luxurious places, and at the very end, it was government treatment centers where they had donated food. They got donated food. I mean, it was, right from one end to the other. But on the one end, right, rich people were told they needed a holistic recovery, right? It was nice. I mean, you get equine therapy, you get massages, you get yoga. Great, it you get chefs to make the food, and you can hang out with movie stars and play volleyball. Now, on the other end, the ones for the poor people was a copy of AA. You get a piece of bacon, and they say, listen, be happy with what you have. God is all you need. Be happy with what you have. So it seemed like it was two different universes for recovery. I often felt shamed in AA, and I'll explain more of this later on. And I also came across this idea on a trip to Peru. I did something very uncharacteristic of myself, and I about 3 years ago, I took a trip down to Peru. I brought 3 books with me. I brought A Brief History of Everything by Ken Wilber, Richard Dawkins, The God Delusion, and Haruki Murakami's Norwegian Wood. But the strange thing that happened to me is that I hate flying, so when I was in Peru, I took these bus rides, but they were like 20 hours long, right? To go from Lima to Machu Picchu was 20 hours, so I had a great chance to read, and I don't know, I felt a deep sense of resonance with each of these books. I thought it was important to read Dawkins because I felt that in our field it's also important to see other spiritual perspectives besides ours, that is one of belief, right? But I was also brought up Roman Catholic, and I was scared about reading this actually. I had put it off for a long time. This is heresy. It is heresy at its worst, and I might go blind from reading it, but I didn't. Yeah. Murakami's Norwegian Wood. I read it and I said, "Oh my God, this is the most spiritual stuff I've read in a long time." And yet it didn't have any references to God or spirituality in it. But somehow I don't know. I just felt changed after reading it. And Wilber's A Brief History of Everything gave me an idea of where to proceed. So the academic reasons for doing what I'm doing is that transpersonal psychology in relation to addiction studies needs updating. The vast majority of work from our field was written in the 1980s and 1990s on addiction. Okay? Since then, there's been a lull, and I attribute this lull to the fact that the solution to addiction has already been found. According to these books, the solution has already been found. So why write anything else? Right? What would be the purpose if we've already found the solution? And I also wanted to talk about the unscientific nature of spiritual applications in the changing landscape of the American addiction environment. Right? The current North American treatment paradigm favors the recognition of addiction as a complex brain disease, right? Yet there's no other medical disease for which remedy is sought exclusively through spiritual beliefs and practice. So imagine that you have a physical disease like cancer, right? What I'm telling you that your only chance is God, right? This is similar to the Black Plague before the Age of Enlightenment, when we told people you can, right? God is your only chance. And still, this is the year 2015, and we're telling people, knowledge of God is your only chance. You have an incurable disease, right, that you're probably going to die from unless you find God. Okay. So the tools I use, this is a theoretical dissertation. Basically, it meant I read everything there was to read. I read a ton of stuff for this, but I used a middle range approach where I'm taking an existing transpersonal theory, right? I'm using deduction to deduce certain things about it, and using induction to extend it. Okay. I used an integral approach, and there's a gentleman called Repko who provided the following guidelines of how to integrate scholastically, right? Identifying conflicts and assumptions, concepts and theories, both within the transpersonal field as well as across different schools of addiction thought, right? So if I made any contribution, right, to this, is that I tried to combine scientific addiction studies with transpersonal theory on addiction. Prior to this, most of our transpersonal books have been written from the point of view of personal experience, right, and anecdote and speculation, right? Except for Stan Grof, who did LSD experiments, right, and he documented a lot of his results. Most of the stuff that we've written in the past lacked, how can I say it, lacked any sort of interaction with what was going on, going on in the addiction world outside. B, conjecturing how each side would perceive the other. So I tried to think to myself, well, what would people from the scientific community think of us, and how do we think of them, right? C, discovering ways in which they might contribute to one another, and D, establishing common ground between them, and 5, using information to construct an updated and integrated transpersonal model of addiction. That's basically the tools I used. Okay, so what is this classic transpersonal model of addiction that I'm talking about, right? Well, it doesn't come from any one person, right? For those of us in the field, we know that a little bit comes from Jung, a little bit comes from Massagioli, a little bit came from William James, right? Jung mentioned mentioned alcoholism or addiction a total of 19 times in his entire work. And yet, Jung, Massagioli, William James, and not Maslow, contributed to what we have is the current classic transpersonal model of addiction. And it consists of 3 things, okay? The most important one is participation in a 12-step program, such as AA. When in conjunction with psychotherapy that is amenable to spirituality, and 3, NOSC practices. The third one is non-ordinary states of consciousness, right? We can get that through meditation, taking a pill. It's things that, anything that would alter our sense of consciousness, anything therapeutic, anyway, that could alter our sense of consciousness. But it consists of these three things. Now, the important thing to understand about this is that when there was a set of 6 authors, and let me explain this later, but what they said is that, you know, AA has the answer, but we'll be the adjunct, right? We'll help you with AA if you have any problems with AA, but we're going to push AA, and we'll cheerlead from the side as adjuncts, right? And so that was basically the solution. And maybe I'm using cheerlead, it's a bit too harsh a word, but if you read some of the literature, it's all very much pro-AA. We found the solution. The only problem I have with a lot of the literature at the time is that besides cheering for AA, they didn't really tell you what AA was about. In fact, they had no quotes on AA, and it talks about the effectiveness of AA, and yet there was not a single study. They don't list a single study. They said it's by far and away the most effective method of treating with addiction. But I'm just curious as to where they got this from. Okay. So, in my opinion, this is Stan Grof, the most promising development in the treatment of alcoholism and drug abuse would be the marriage of the 12-step program. The most effective strategy for treating alcoholism and addiction was transpersonal psychology that can provide a solid theoretical background for spiritually grounded therapy, right? So, you'll find this in a lot of other works from Christina Grof, Tav Sparks. Okay, so there's a few underlying assertions of the original transpersonal model of addiction, right? 1, the emphatic opinion that spirituality is the answer to addiction. The essence of recovery is spirituality. 2, in reverse, it is reasoned that addiction is a spiritual malady, a thirst for wholeness, resulting from a spiritual void in one's life. Okay. Wait. There's certain assumptions when we say this, and that is, it's a very romantic notion, right? That addicts are seekers. We seek the transcendent, but we became addicted, right? It's a very romantic notion, and it's a very empathic notion. So, through self-medication, the addict is actually seeking. What the addict is actually seeking is a sense of connectedness that is in fact union with the higher self. And we'll talk about this concept of the higher self later. But the higher self, which you can call God or whatever. We'll talk about this later. But this is what we're seeking. Okay. 4, the extraordinary intensity behind their search is usually trauma, and this can range from anywhere from perinatal upheavals, perinatals during birth, to early attachment wounding, or to an overwhelming spiritual emergency, right? So trauma is the major driving force behind our search for wholeness, behind this thirst for wholeness. Okay. the phenomenon of addiction or craving is viewed as an exaggerated attachment to a pseudo-mystical state fostered by drugs, alcohol, or addictive behavior, as opposed to a state that is induced by genuine spiritual growth. So we've mistakenly, people in the grips of addiction mistakenly take drugs and alcohol when what they really want is a spiritual experience. For the recovering addict, mere abstinence is not enough. They must adopt a comprehensive design for living to ensure that they are weller than well. Right, so mere abstinence is not, in AA they call this, you'll be a dry drunk if you don't adopt a program for living that constantly nurtures, gives you a sense of well-being, right, nurtures personal growth. And finally, in an ideal clinical paradigm, I'll say this again, transpersonal side is a marriage. Transpersonal psychology and consciousness research as a logical, professional component to convey the 12 steps, and the original idea spawned of the steps. So far so good. I mean, it sounds like it sounds fairly reasonable, right? The underlying mechanism of the transpersonal model is, and I didn't know how far I should delve into this, is a process of ego, death, and rebirth vis-a-vis relationship with a higher self, right? And in the 12 steps, they also mirror this. Is to how can I say it? In AA, they would say that addiction is caused by. They would say that addiction is, well, transpersonal psychology. They would say this, that following the dictates of our ego rather than our higher self being the God self within each person, within each mind. Imagine each mind has a wise old man, right? We follow our ego instead of this wise old man inside our mind. We'll spill over into addiction, right? Get to know this wise old man, right, inside our minds, and things will get better. But in order to do so, we've got to reduce the, not put away, but to understand where the role, what the role of the ego plays in our lives, right? Tame the beast that is the ego. Is that okay to say? Okay. So in order to make space for a revised model, right? And I'll explain why we need a revised model later. But in order to make space for it, I had to deconstruct our current model based on 3 things, right? Okay, one of the reasons why we encourage AA attendance is that we hear that it's spiritual and not religious, right? We should go to AA. At the time of transpersonal psychology's founding, okay, transpersonal psychology needed to show an example of how spirituality can help in healing. An obvious partner would of course be an addiction when we use AA, right? They've used this effectively, right? So, and AA will tell you it's a spiritual and not religious organization. Right, so I had to deconstruct, I had to first, in fact, show that AA is actually much more religious than it professes to be. 2, right? I have to show that an AA is a mindset of one of learned helplessness, while transpersonal psychology seeks to bolster self-efficacy, right? I don't care if it's transpersonal psychology, I don't care if it's any kind of therapy. Any kind of therapy would try to bolster your sense of self-efficacy, right? Right? How you can deal with this, right? Remember, the AA model is one and one only. Your one chance is God, right? But what they also mean is that your one chance is an external God. This God cannot, oh, and I'm sorry, I brought some handouts that show you the 12 steps of AA, right? Anyway, we can pass that along. Okay. So as the point 2, right? Any kind of form of recognized therapy will try to how to bolster a person's self-efficacy. In AA undermines it, and I'll explain more later on as to how this happens. And 3, contrary to what is often asserted, AA has not demonstrated that as the most effective solution to alcoholism or addiction, right? Okay. sorry, then I kind of went a bit fast on this because I realized that I was doing one slide at a time and it was going to take me forever. So. In my work, I first wanted to explain what the underlying psychological mechanisms, according to the transpersonal model, is, right? So I used the theories of Washburn, I used the theories of Jung and Assagioli, and I kind of described how the founding fathers of transpersonal psychology explain how God works in psychological terms, right? And how this would kind of like affect the human mind to improve. So I spent a while explaining this. First of all, I wanted to lay perfectly clear, and what I wanted to show from this, the reason why I wanted to show this was that I wanted to show that the external being is not, in our field, is not so important as the psychic change, right? The external being, there's a lot of good reasons for the external being, and one of them is to reflect the higher self within ourselves. So we can use an external. It's sort of like object relations, right? If we have a healthy vision of God, then it'll reflect a healthy vision of ourselves inside. And I gave a couple of other very good reasons why we should have an external being, right? As a Godhead, right? I didn't discount it. I'm not saying that this Godhead doesn't work, but I'm saying that the mechanisms for psychological change do not absolutely require divine intervention. Right? Okay. But what I was setting the groundwork for by showing this is that persons from all religious orientations could benefit from transpersonal psychology in some way without having to adhere to a specific religious doctrine. Then I went into the relationship of AA and religion, right? So I wrote this section called Cross Paths, Christian Mysticism and Evangelism. Our field is extremely interested in Christian mysticism. We're interested in spirituality of an experiential nature, right? We examine the experiential nature of a lot of different religions, right? And we look at this at these practices and we say, well, how does spirituality help health and healing, right? But I also wanted to point out that AA comes from the perspective of evangelism. And there's nothing wrong with evangelism, but evangelism, the main component of evangelism is proselytization, is conversion. We're trying, right? AA originated from this organization called the Oxford Group. The Oxford Group was a huge movement in the 1920s that actually coined the phrase spiritual, not religious. It was a Protestant movement, a Calvinistic Protestant movement that captured the attention of a lot of people who weren't satisfied with organized religion, right? The movement, it was a mass movement, and 11 of AA's 12 steps actually come straight from the Oxford Group. 11, yeah. But I wanted to point out, already there's this difference, right? Although we study Christian mysticism and perhaps other aspects of Christianity, we're not interested in proselytization. This is not what the field is about. We're not trying to convert people, but in AA, we have to follow a process of conversion. Otherwise, the whole thing doesn't work. Okay? So then, in my next section, I call it a Trojan horse called spiritual, not religious. Right? Remember, the Oxford Group, which was, if you ask any AA member about the Oxford Group, they say, we're not the Oxford Group. They were religious, we're spiritual. Okay? The Oxford Group could claim to be spiritual, not religious, because they were open to all Christian denominations, right? But they recognize one supreme being, Jesus Christ, right? They mention Jesus Christ by name. Now, the God of AA is also androcentric, meaning male, right? Anthropomorphic, right? Cares about our daily lives. In fact, he bears a lot of resemblance to the Christian God, right? And so, anyway, I wanted to push this that AA is actually a lot more religious than it is. And so there's a lot of arguments about this, right? If we look at our tolerance for religion, or what is religious and what is spiritual, it lies on a continuum, right? But more and more so, people have, how can I say it? Their tolerance for what is called spiritual, how can I say it? They're more strict about people are becoming more strict about what we call spiritual and religious. They're more discerning, right? So when they smell that something bears a lot more resemblance. Put it this way, they're becoming much smarter to the disguise, which you can disguise things with spiritual and not religious, right? Okay, great. So I explained the rationale for the alliance, which was transpersonal psychology needed a modality to show that spirituality can help in healing. So AA was a good example. Two, they also needed to show that practical spirituality, experiential spirituality was useful. Unfortunately, and one of the authors at the time, who's also named Whitfield, he said that in the 1960s there was no place to actually practice spirituality except for AA or in the rooms of organized religion. So we can see where this bond came between AA and transpersonal psychology. But about 10 years ago, the Supreme Court, State Court of New York, declared AA to be religious. Right? What happened was that there was a prisoner who was sent to AA who complained that he said, "This is religious and this is against my constitutional rights." So the Supreme Court of New York actually had a look at all this stuff, and AA's trusted servants came to testify they were spiritual, not religious. The Supreme Court of New York shut them down, and they said, "You purposely mix these terms up so it becomes meaningless." In essence, what you're trying to do is urge people to believe that there's a Father, a creator of light, a supernatural being, right? You're actually urging a conversion to this. So it is a religious organization. But ultimately, another study, a very careful study, called it a quasi-religion. It's a quasi-religion. It bears some relationship, some resemblance to religion, and some not. And so they compared it to Scientology. Right? They said much. Right? AA. If we were going to call Scientology a non-religion, so is AA. It's a doctrine of, and then my next session was the doctrine of spiritual exclusion. Okay. When we hear that anyone can come to AA, and it's a spiritual and not religious organization, right? We would assume that, well, all faiths, all beliefs can come in. But what AA serves as a member they use the spiritual, not religious, as a funnel, so that everyone can come in, but it's constrained to one particular belief at the end, right? And if you don't believe in their God, then you're immature, you're stunted, you're prideful. AA prides itself in having a chapter to the agnostic, explaining the AA program to the agnostic. Right? They always say, "Oh, we have a chapter to the agnostic." The chapter to the agnostic is one thing and one thing only: an attempt to convert non-believers to their God. They're very specific about their God. He is a Father; we are His children. Right? And in the way those steps are worded, right? The sequence of the steps is first, right? The first 2 and 3 steps they talk about a higher power. After that, they're like, "You've grown up enough. We'll just call Him God now." Right, from step 4 onwards, they're 100% clear. This is God we're talking about. So I talked a lot about this, about AA theology and how it bears a lot of resemblance to religion. Then next I went to the contradictions and omissions. What happens in a lot of transpersonal literature is that in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of disparagement in transpersonal literature on mainstream religions, right? Christina Groff's The Thirst for Wholeness, right? If you're looking for wholeness, the image of an external entity will not quench your thirst, right? They write a lot of things like traditional religions talk of God as a man, right? This is also confusing this will be confusing to people who are, you know, who want a spiritual practice. So basically what I'm saying is that at the same time as there's disparaging mainstream religions, they see nothing about AA. When AA has those exact same qualities they're talking about in mainstream religions. Right? So it's almost like a blinders on, right? Mainstream religion, chauvinistic, right? And I want to be clear, this talk is not about whether mainstream religion is good or bad. But what I do have a problem with is a sense of theoretical inconsistency from the field, right? It's not okay for one. It's not okay for one set of people to do certain things, but it's okay for another set. Okay. So, in a lot of literature, in a lot of AA literature, right, from scientists and doctors, right, what we see is a reluctance to face AA's religious claims, right? So, let's say Gregory Bateson, founder of family therapy, he will say to you, you can replace God in the 12 steps with systems. Or in transpersonal theory, you can say you can replace God with higher self. Right? Why not just switch concepts of God and you can go into and you'll thrive in AA. The only problem with that is that the entire pedagogic, the entire literature of AA tells you that there's a supernatural being who will cure you, who will temporarily take this disease away from you. Right? So in AA they say, oh, you can have anything as your higher power. You can have a doorknob, but they tell you that there's one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. So why would I choose a doorknob, right, a lifeless object, in the place of one who has all power to remove my alcoholism, right? But they use the idea that anyone can come in as an opening, as a mental opening. Once you have this mental opening, we will convert you, right? We will convert you. And there's 40 stories at the back of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, 40 stories, and they change them every 15 years. And all these 40 stories, everybody was converted, bar one. So 39 of them they actually talk about the same God. And I wrote about this. Okay, when we have spiritual experiences, right? Let's say near-death experiences, 49% of people will report that they had unitive experiences, feeling of being one, being at one with the world. And yet the spiritual awakening promised by AA, the spiritual experiences, 39 out of 40 of them were about this anthropomorphic, androcentric external being, right? And it was all, and you can say that, you know, Buddhism, right, Eastern spirituality, they made a lot of headway into U.S. culture. Why are none of the stories at the back of the big book resemble anything like Buddhist enlightenment? Right? And I think this was a very telling sign of you know, the agenda of AA's agenda. The one exception is a story from atheist. He says AA doesn't force me to believe in anything. Right? They put a story in there. Right? He's sort of like the guy who sat at the back of the class. They put him with the cap. Well, you'll get there someday. You know, you'll get there. But that was the kind of feeling you get about it, right? So they put his story in, but they change these stories every 15 years. Right? What they won't change in AA is the main portion of the instructional text. The first 184 pages of the AA text is exactly the same as it was in the 1930s. They haven't changed a word, right? And the reason why they haven't changed a word of it is, well, Carl Jung would say this, because it's a blueprint for a spiritual experience, right? It's sacred. And once you have a sacred experience, these become codified. So, right, religious experience becomes codified. You can't change it. You can't change God's word, right? Similarly, AA will never change. It can't change. Everyone that founded AA, they're all dead now. So there's nobody has the authority to change it. They're scared to change us. So what it's in fact saying is that we don't care what any new discoveries about alcoholism. We have the answer, right? We have the answer. And they tell you in Alcoholics Anonymous, science can't really help. Right? We shouldn't belittle a good doctor, but let's face it, he can't really help us. Right? So so if you adhere to AA, they've already got the solution. It doesn't matter what scientific discoveries there are, right? So we're going back to, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot. And there's also a critical response to AA in the sense of this. When we use the term spiritual and not religious, right? Okay, basically, I think I made a fairly convincing case that AA's theology is basically Protestant Christian theology. Okay, but when we call it spiritual and not religious, we're trying to push this in and infiltrate other areas of life. Right? And the problem with that, for a lot of people, how can I say this? It's like the people who have a problem with the Lord's Prayer being said in schools. Right? A lot of people say, this is harmless. Why don't we say the Lord's Prayer in schools? It's an example of political hegemony, right? Religious hegemony. We start spreading this around, but we normalize it like it's an everyday thing. In AA meetings, and a lot of them in the United States, they'll say the Lord's Prayer. You'll hold hands and say the Lord's Prayer. Right? So they normalize it, right? But what it's actually doing is that it's infiltrating places where we go where we were not expecting this, and they normalize it. This is also a political thing, right? And how can I explain this? Well, I'm sure everyone here is aware of how hegemony works. Hegemony works, right? We follow the two political parties, and so in my next section, I wrote "The Sea Is Not Calm: Transpersonal Psychotherapy, AA, and the Locus of Authority." Right? In most of the books that we read about in the 1980s and that I talked about in the 1980s and 1990s that talked about transpersonal psychology's relationship with AA, none of them talked about possible problems they had with integrating the AA program. The only one problem they talked about is that people in AA are told not to take their medication, right? Because this will trigger their addiction. But Stan Grof found that when he tried to encourage the use of LSD or even holotropic breathwork, things that NOSD, non-ordinary states of consciousness, right, practices, they had a problem getting them accepted in AA. That was the only problem with AA and transpersonal theory. But I beg to differ. I beg to differ about this. We have a lot of problems, right, integrating transpersonal AA and transpersonal theory. And the primary one I talked about was this idea of the locus of authority, right? We're trying to tell our clients that you can find the locus of authority within yourself, right? This is paramount, and yet AA is constantly telling them you don't have it within yourself, right? In fact, AA is all about. A lot of AA is about morals, right? Addicts don't not only have the power within themselves, they're addicted because they're selfish, self-seeking people. We're worse than normal people, and that's why we're addicts. Now we're trying to get better, right? It's a very elegant. It's a very elegant argument. It seems to make a lot of sense, right? But remember, the transpersonal orientation doesn't use morality. It has an empathic relationship with addicts, right? Addicts are spiritual seekers. The AA, we're selfish, self-centered. We're worse, right? Okay. So,
Peter,
yes.
do you have to move
Oh my
forward?
God. Oh my God. Okay.
You made some good points. You should go to what you're doing, what your conclusions are.
Okay. I just want to say one really quick thing about narcissism and grace, right? And a lot of literature, we hear that God's grace is the only way of dealing with addiction, right? This is concept of grace. And what grace is divine intervention. It sounds good. I mean, it sounds very nice and humble. But if we tell people that God's grace is the only hope for addiction, then any research that we have is completely unnecessary. We don't need any other. Let's throw all the books away. Let's throw all the research away. Let's prepare everybody for God's grace. The problem with God's grace is this: is that it can't be affected by human cause. We can't ask for God's grace. God chooses, picks and chooses. We have no idea what He does, right? But He picks and chooses people to save, right? So when we use a lot of these fuzzy terms to describe recovery, I just wanted to point this out. So empirical research on the relationship between spirituality and addiction, right? In a nutshell, there are no studies that can actually show the effectiveness of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? But what I wanted to show was, look at the research during the 80s, because that would be the research that was available when a lot of transpersonal authors wrote the books. And there was one very interesting study that was done by a man named George Vaillant. George Vaillant was a Harvard University professor. He was a board member of AA, so he did a longitudinal study. He's a doctor at the hospital over 8 years, right? Half the people in his group, I think it was 88 men, went to AA. The other half didn't, right? And he tracked them over 8 years. So it had longitude, and it also had random. It was also random. What he found was, for the two groups, exactly the same, 5%. So if you don't go to AA, there's a natural remission of 5%. If you go to AA, there's also 5%. And this was not done by a biased person. He was a board member of AA. He said that he was shocked. This study was out, and I listed a lot of studies, both for and against AA. But I just felt that this was a very interesting one. Okay. And then I looked at the evidence for spirituality in the treatment of addiction. If AA isn't particularly effective, what is the evidence for spirituality? Right? And so, first I defined spirituality for addiction studies. What is spirituality? That was quite long in itself. But what spirituality has shown is that people who are religious tend less to be addicts. Right? It's a protective measure. Spiritual practice works as a protective measure, and people can explain it as socialization. You're not around other people who are using, right? So spiritual practice actually works. And then I looked at the application of spirituality in treatment. And this is very interesting. How does when we apply spirituality in treatment, does it work? Right? So William Miller from New Mexico, who does a lot of research on addiction, he devised this really elegant test, right? He's careful. We're going to isolate spirituality this time, and let's see it work, right? So he got a whole team of people together, including a famous author, a whole team of spiritual counselors together, and say we're gonna do a spiritual injunction, right? On top of treatment as usual. So you had two groups: treatment as usual, treatment as usual with spirituality. The abstinence rates for the two groups, identical, except with one difference. The ones who got the spiritual treatment, they showed much higher levels of anxiety and stress. Right? This went contrary to everything to everything he tried to do. He was like, I can't understand this. But other scientists looked at his experiment, right? He said, you have every reason to be confident in your studies. This is science at its best. Okay, so then there's a big question mark about this. So finally, I studied neurotheology and spirituality, right? There's an innate drive in all of us, right? Much like the drive for food, shelter, it's a primal drive towards spiritual experiences. I'm sorry, it took way too long, and I'm going to go very quick on this. Okay. So when I read Ken Wilber, how Ken Wilber differed from transpersonal psychology before him was that Ken Wilber didn't just assign spiritual experiences to those that happen in the mind. He said that spirit is everywhere, and if spirit is everywhere, then we have to have our spiritual experiences not just confined to those of the mind. Okay, we'll go back to that later. So explain the concept of recovery, but in order to have a transpersonal model of recovery, we have to say what is transpersonal. Right? We have to define the parameters of what is actually transpersonal. So there's 3 stages in transpersonal psychology's growth, right? Transcendence, wholeness, and transformation. Transcendence is what happens inside our mind when we transcend the personal ego, right? The other 2 stages were wholeness, and this is what I'm talking about. Ken Wilber's model. He talked about wholeness, right? And I'll show you a graph in a second. And the 3rd stage is transformation. right? Not only transformation, not only transcendence of the individual, but transformation of the community, as well as the person. Okay, so there's 3 stages of transpersonal psychology's growth, of which the classic transpersonal model of addiction is at this stage, transcendence, and possibly moving towards wholeness, right? But these other 2 stages, right? Wilber's model of wholeness, and Ferrer's participatory. Oh my God, participatory. What is it? Participatory. Participatory. Spirituality is for the stage 3 for transformation. And so, I just wanted to give a brief graph of what Wilber's model entails, right? It's in 4 sections. All manifest reality, according to Wilber, has these 4 components. The I space, I internal, what I think, I outside, external, the physical. But inside of all manifest reality, there's also a collective space, right? Our social, how we think socially, and our external social, cultural institutions and outside. So everything has a singular and a plural inside. And I'm sorry I don't have time for this, but I'll try to explain it as best I can, right? So any treatment for addiction, a comprehensive treatment, right, would follow along these four quadrants, right? The interior collective, the exterior collective, the interior, how we think, how society thinks. What are the organizations, right? The cultural organizations, and 3 are external, our bodies, right? So we have our minds, our bodies, our cultural institutions, and our collective way of thinking about things, which we can condense it to 3 things later. But so these little-known authors had made a model of addiction using Wilber's model, and they're saying that we can use treatments, right, that correspond to all the 4 quadrants. Right, and they give you specific treatment methods, right? Medications, right? Here, for the body, right? Individual counseling for the mind, right? Cultural specific treatments and access to treatment. Does that make sense so far? Okay, great. Because I'm losing myself, but thank you. So in my revised transpersonal model of addiction, I took the theories of Wilber and Ferrer, and I'll explain Ferrer's model more because I didn't really have a chance to do that, right? And combined it into, okay. First, what we do is we use evidence-based treatments, right? An approach, the I, it, and we in a person's life, right? And I had a list, and I combined a list of a comprehensive list of, how do you say it? The treatments that had the most evidence behind them. The treatments that had the most evidence behind them, right? First and foremost was brief interventions, right? Second was motivational interviewing, right? 4 was community reinforcement. 38 was AA, right? But each of the treatments on the list would correspond to this part of an individual. But merely having a what do you call it? Biopsychosocial model is not enough. A biopsychosocial model is a headless model, right? We group treatments together and we say, well, it's good, it's balanced, right? But a child knows that, right? It doesn't really mean anything. So what the transpersonal can do is give a head to biopsychosocial treatments, and it's trying to steer people towards 3 different things: transformation, transcendence, and wholeness. Right? The 3 stages of transpersonal psychology until today. Will it work? I don't know. But this is the 4th thing. Jorge will say that, well, where's the supernatural in this? Where's God in this? And so I borrowed from the Zen Enso, right? I left the door open for things that we can't explain. Right? It's very technical, but Hoyer would also have a problem with this, because he would say it was a post-Kantian way of bracketing God, or whatever. He called it something like post-Kantian something, but I've been called much worse. So I can live with that. I can live with that. And so this was basically the model that I came up with in the end. I'm sorry everything was so rushed. I mean, if I had it my way, I would have just read the whole thing and tortured you for 4 hours, but I couldn't, right? Okay, finally, Craig wanted to know how to apply this model, right? Oh wait, I had this. Okay, I have 2 slides left, Carol, and that's it. Okay. So my conclusions to my model is this: by applying both integral and participatory lenses towards the reconstruction of a transpersonal model of addiction, it is determined that the concept of spirituality within the transpersonal field had moved on from focusing primarily on intrapsychic concerns. Wilbur had presented a convincing map of wholeness, which revealed that spiritual experiences were a combination of intrapsychic, those that happen in the mind, objective, and intersubjective factors. Farrer led the transpersonal project further away from its instinctive perennialistic learnings, meaning perennialistic means all things go to one. Okay? So how does with addiction is that recovery is that we should all recover in one way, right? We all come to addiction in one way, and we all leave in one way. Okay. Farrer led the transpersonal project further away from its instinctive perennialistic leanings by arguing that spiritual experiences are not pre-given occurrences, but rather different for each person, independent on context. Okay. So if we got, and Farrer's main thing is this, and I'll say it very quickly. It's like a kung fu move. Okay, how we look at spiritual experiences is this: we attend a party, right? If addiction is a party that we attend, then we all got to it differently, right? Let's just say in this room, we all came to this, right? We all came here differently. We all came here differently. We all carry a lot of baggage differently, right? Yet we're all in the same room, but we all have different experiences of what it is today. Some people say this is the worst presentation they've ever seen. Some people might have got something from this. But this is what Farrer was saying. Okay? When their theories are applied to the phenomena of both addiction and recovery, it can be extrapolated as to why these two concepts exist on a continuum. Why everyone becomes addicted differently, and why everyone finds a different sort of recovery. Okay? The theories also substantiate the idea of human interrelatedness in the development of widespread problems as well as possible solutions. Okay? So what Farrer is arguing for is that, okay, when I talked about that spiritual counseling, that experiment they did with the 2 groups, and the ones who got spiritual counseling were actually more anxious and more stressed out. This actually provides a clue as to why this could happen. Okay? When we have spiritual experiences, and when we're trying to follow the spiritual experiences of another person, right, verbatim, it creates a lot of stress, right? How should we appear if we're recovering? Do I have to put on my recovery mask on? Do I have to smell it, breathe it? How would I appear to get your approval as a recovering person? Do I have to walk and talk like Bill Wilson? Right, so I just want you to think about that, and it's a possible answer, because the people who did experience it, they were at a loss for words, right? They couldn't understand it. But also, when we look at spirituality and we see it's separate from our everyday living, right? So all of a sudden, spirituality is divorced from day-to-day living. In the model that I showed you, the entire model is spiritual. We don't say spiritual. In fact, the biopsychosocial and transpersonal are encapsulated by the spiritual. We no longer separate it. And finally, the last thing I would like to say, Craig wanted me to show how this model could be used, right? Could be applied, and so a potential client, therefore, would be directed towards a process of intrapsychic change, okay, using techniques like Jungian analytical psychology or psychosynthesis. 2, coupled with a balanced mix of evidence-based injunctions that not only address the entire person as per as per Wilber's 4 quadrants, but is mindful not to favor one important etiological perspective of addiction over another. And 3, they are also encouraged to partake in activities that assist in psychosocially integrating with the community at large. Okay. I just have 2 more minutes, and this is the most important thing I have to say. At the beginning, I'm sorry. At the beginning, remember I showed you that quote, right? And I said, and I didn't realize it until now. The solution lies in this. With our current model of addiction treatment, it's one that encourages everyone to take personal responsibility for their predicament, right? In fact, it's solely personal. The whole problem is between yourself and God, right? It sounds quite elegant, right? But what it does is it releases society and culture from helping these people. In fact, AA put us into this mess in the first place because they tell you that we're bad people. Well, why not incarcerate bad people then? I certainly don't. I mean, I don't like being around selfish, self-centered, morally defective human beings, right? So it's much like, how can we say it? Uncle Tom from Uncle Tom's Cabin, right? By accepting this model, complete personal responsibility, right? As, okay, how can I say it? Poor people, it's their fault, right? Everyone has an equal opportunity. It's their fault they're poor. Well, for addicts, it's their fault they're addicts, right? They're responsible. They're morally reprehensible characters. Trying to be good though, trying to be good. Look at the good recovering person. He's better than good now. He has God on his side, and he lives his life by a set of morals. Meanwhile, we've thrown a lot of people under the bus because I know a lot of dead people. I know a lot of dead people that died from this disease. I shouldn't say disease, but I know a lot of people who died from addiction because they were hurting. They weren't particularly bad people. They were people that were hurting. Right? But under this model, there's no room for hurting. Hurting is an excuse. Right? It's an excuse for your immorality. So I wanted to be clear about this. And if there's anything you got from this model, by following the current treatment paradigm, this is how we get to 25% incarceration. They're bad people anyway. And you know who says they're bad people? People in recovery say they're bad people. They're saying that. Right? So do you understand how subtle that is, and how insidious that might be? So that's it. I'm sorry I went over. I might have to apologize. I really rushed that. I'm sorry. I have no sense of time. But it was very difficult to explain everything in 45 minutes. It really was.
Well, you got an hour.
Oh, yeah, I did. Yes. At least 3 days.
Well, the second part of this defense is I would like to give each one of your committee members 15 minutes to really engage with you on questions or interests that they might have. You can actually get into a conversation,
Right.
maybe have a chance to relax and kind of talk about some important issues in your community.
Thank you.
So I'd actually like to start with our external member, Dr. Nolan. It could take about 15 minutes to flesh out some issues he's talking about.
I kind of want to go to a different spot for a moment because I'm feeling your heart is so huge and your passion is so huge that I want to just like stop a second and breathe and honor that and just say that it's just incredible. It's so I honor you, Peter.
Thank you.
I'd also just like for us to honor people who are probably within a 3-iron shot of this building who are struggling with addictions. They're all over. This is very real. We're in a heady academic environment where we can do models that have 8 subcategories of 16 subsections of 42 subunits. And there's some guy over here who's puking his brains out and wondering, you guys have anything to say to me or anything going on up in that school that can help me out here, because I'd like to hear that part. I really can't understand Ken Wilber's model, so if you guys could help, that would be good. I kind of just want to bring them in here. We probably have relatives, friends who are struggling with this, have struggled with it, have died from it. I certainly have that in my family, and I just kind of want to pull in that light a little bit. This stuff is real. It's not just models and academics. It's unbelievably real. And nobody knows that better in this room than soon to be Dr. N. Well, you know where I come from, Peter. In our school, our mission statement is transforming consciousness through education. And one of the things I just want to ask you about is there, whether the process of working with all this stuff was for you in any way transformative, and if so, how?
It was. I mean, I have to say that I felt, while I was doing this, I felt a sense of kind of like indignation. Indignation. What Jim was talking about, right? There's a lot of people hurting out there, right? But when they go into treatment, they get another push, another shove, which is you're a bad person. Now, I'm not saying I was a good person going into treatment. What I am saying is that I know a lot of people who were nice people, but they were forced to accept that they had many defects of character. That they were told they were bad. They were actually told they were bad people, but you could get better, right? We hear about empathy in AA, right? Empathy for these people, right? AA is a place, right? Christine Groff talks a lot about this, but the empathy is this. Where they're coming from is this. Oh man, I was once like you. I was a selfish, self-centered person like you, and that's why I love you, right? It's like, gee, thanks, right? Gee, thanks. So. And I have changed. I mean, I used to believe it was all personal responsibility. I said, I got myself into this, I got to get myself out of this. And, you know, there was help, and there's always help out there for this. But then I started thinking, right, okay, family systems, right? If anyone's familiar with family systems, they'll tell you this, is that there's no point in treating the alcoholic when it goes back to the family system. The addict is actually the identified patient in a fractured system, right? Similarly, right? And I came across this guy called Bruce Alexander that really changed my mind about addiction. He wrote a book called The Globalization of Addiction, and he talked about the same thing, but with society. So there's no point in treating the addict if it goes back into that same broken society. And he identifies free market economics, right, as the culprit. So yeah, I have changed quite a lot. I mean, there's something bugging me, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And this is it. It's the idea of throwing people under the bus. I'm recovered now. I'm a good guy. See me, I can work in the house now. I'll leave everybody else outside. I don't want to do that. I don't. That's what AA is. It's okay. This way, if you like the way things are, you're gonna hate what I just said, right? But if you don't like the way things are, then maybe there's a possibility of change, right? But the idea of the addict taking personal responsibility is a very Republican argument. It fits very well into that Republican life, right? You got yourself into it, you can get yourself out. You know, it's a fair deck outside for everybody, and that's not true. When you go to AA, you get two people coming in. Okay, one guy's a middle-aged Caucasian guy. For him, the treatment is spiritual. Then on the other hand, you get an African American guy, a young guy, and we think ghetto. I'm not just thinking me. I'm saying I've been guilty of this, right? It's I don't know. It's right, but it made me think a lot about my own attitudes.
Me too. It was transformative for me to read it. And I'm aware that I'm not a collectivist thinker, that I'm an individualist thinker. I'm aware that I'm American, like, deep, and I get that. And you know, and I see these things like, if it's a disease, that's not my problem yet, it's your disease. If it's an allergy, that's still not my problem. If it's a moral deficit, that's definitely not my problem. It's still your problem, so I don't see how I'm involved at all yet. And that really, to read that last part of your dissertation where you walk through that piece and kind of made it something that the collective holds and has responsibility for. And it may manifest through you, but it is my issue. And that's hard for me, and I was transforming with your writing, I was getting that. And I almost didn't want to accept it, like I really don't have any interest in being responsible for your behavior, really. But as I read through it, I had that feeling that it doesn't matter if I'm interested in it, I do have some. This is a collectivist thing. It is a family. It's cultural. It's social. So it was transformative for me as a reader. And if anybody hasn't read it, I'd recommend that you read it. It's a really, it's an amazing piece of work. I felt honored to be able to kind of walk with Peter through it. So I'm also, you know, you were on the street. I'm an inner city Cleveland kid, and you know, I'm walking through the Wilbur stuff. I looked at a poem this morning by Robert Frost that I really like called Birches, and he talks about going out on these frozen branches, and it's literal and it's metaphorical by like reaching and stretching and stretching. At some point, you have to grab one and swing it back down and get back and be grounded and hit the ground. And so he would talk about in his life kind of intellectually reaching and stretching, and then at some point you have to come down to earth. And I look at the, you know, the models and all this stuff we're working with here, and how does it come back down to the earth? How does it get the guy over there, Peter? Do you have any thoughts on how we bridge from us to, unfortunately, the way I think about it, them, because they're not in the room?
Yeah, one thing, kindness. Kindness. Okay. When I said that, remember I said that recovery is also like an event, right? And we're all here, it's recovery. How we can also help is, we can help change the venue where the event is held. We can all work towards change. This is psychosocial integration. One of the quadrants I was talking about, right? But it's kindness, to see that we're all somehow related in not only the solution, but also the problem. That somehow we contribute to the problem. Because if addiction is an event, right? We all attend the event somehow, right? So, I don't know, an unkind word I say to somebody, right? Make them feel worse. I don't know, but I think kindness. I honestly believe this. Kindness, right? See that people are hurting, right? And not to contribute to this, right? I mean, one thing I really got out of this was, out of my studies was actually, I had a deep appreciation for women's studies. I never thought it came from me, but I looked at their arguments and said, oh my God, these arguments are great.
You know, another thing I wondered about, and I realized it's outside the scope of the work you did, and you said that, but there's the androcentric piece in here, the kind of Eurocentric. Most of the writers are kind of, even Wilbur and Ferrer and everybody else, pretty much Eurocentric. And I kept wondering how, and I know you, in your, I don't know if this is the correct word, post-Catholic days, became more interested in Eastern thought and so on. And I just wonder, it feels like most of the planet is not involved in this conversation. And specifically, whatever anybody means by this Eastern thought, let's just put that out there. And just wonder, like, where that points for you. If there's anything out there that you kind of, you couldn't incorporate into this because you incorporated like everything ever written about the topic in here. But as you look out into that world that's not in here, what do you see out there?
In terms of?
In terms of working with addiction.
I have to say, and this is a few weeks ago, this is going to sound terrible, I actually went to Church Street to see if I could get a volunteer job. Church Street is in the middle of the Tenderloin, but they had a harm reduction site. I went in there, and I was so far removed from this now, I nearly threw up. When I got in there, you could smell urine, right? People were walking around, and their faces like, tons of marks on them, like stumbling around like this, right? The place was like, it was like Apocalypse Now inside of it, inside this tiny room. And I have to say, I'm kind of guilty of this too. It's great writing about this from afar, but when actually on the front line of this, it's harrowing. It really is. And I have to, for myself, I would like to actually just volunteer, so I'll look into that again. But it caught me by surprise because I was so far removed from that part of life. But I mean, right, but as soon as you smell the urine, and this is in a recovery place. This is in a drop-in center. As soon as you smell the urine, you're like, oh my God, what am I getting myself into? Right, head for the hills. Go head back to AA. That's nice. Have a mug of coffee and talk about defects of character. I can deal with that. I can deal with that. Right? But you're absolutely right. Jim. I mean, it's very easy for us to talk about this now, but I've had friends that don't whole complete arms were this complete is one huge track. I haven't been around that for a long time now.
I think that's all for me.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Peter.
Well, thank you. I really, I also really appreciated the passion that you have for this. And I remember, I think was it my qualitative research class that you were in?
Yes.
Where I first asked you about topics, and you were like, yeah, just kind of kicking around a couple of things. And, there was nothing that was really up, and this is so different. It's fun to have the two views of you, you know. I wanted to kind of take the question that you were just asked and put it a little differently. So, for whom would this model be useful? Let me put it that way.
Dead people. No, see, I don't say this jokingly.
Yeah.
I'm not saying joking. I was thought about who I'm writing for. I have a lot of. I got to know a lot of dead people. Oh my gosh. I actually brought a video to show, but I wanted them to know that how can I say it? That people do care. That I wanted them to know that there are people out there who do care, who aren't going to make moral judgments about them, and who aren't going to say to them, "You died so that I would have lived." You set a good example for me. That's how I lived. And I put a video at the end of this to show what was said about dead people in AA. Right, what is often heard about when people die in AA, and they were mean things. They're mean things. They weren't honest. They weren't honest, or they kept secrets. Blah blah blah. Right. And I put a video at the end of this to show, but we didn't have the time. But I wrote. This model works for people who are, because it helps them. It helps them if they go to AA and they feel marginalized. If they feel marginalized, right, or they happen to use critical thinking. Well, these are all faculty. I mean, things like critical thinking can be applied to your own process of recovery. You don't have to forego it. You can have a spiritual orientation without having to convert, right? Spirituality is larger than conversion. But I thought about a lot of my dead friends, and you know, after I wrote this, and I honestly felt that if I wrote something, I would say that for the people I know who died.
That sounds like a really good dedication for the work that's going to come out of this. So I wanted to also ask a question. So, transpersonal psych has focused a lot on the spiritual heights, exemplary or extraordinary human experience, levels of consciousness and things like that. Do you think that has anything to do with how it has held its model of addiction? In terms of it being ineffective, in terms of, or to be more accurate, in terms of it being incomplete.
Yes, because the external heights you're talking about are primarily intrapsychic, right? What occurs in our mind. So their thinking is this: if I have a spiritual experience, and spiritual experiences, as I wrote down, carry an enormous charge, like it's mental TNT, like dynamite, right? So the idea is that we use spiritual experiences like dynamite to clear out the fuzziness of our brains, and we come to a new understanding. But even if I did so, right, and I go back to my environment, and nothing has really changed, right? What are we going to do with that? There's a Buddhist place in Thailand. They guarantee that you'll stay clean, right? If you stay there for a year, they guarantee it. Yet I know a ton of people that relapse. I mean, it's all fine and good when they're in Thailand, and it's all nice. They go back to Great Britain or whatever. The first thing they do is shoot up. They go back home, and nothing has changed. But the place is so cheap that nobody really would ask them for the money back, you know. So it's okay. It's like $1 a day. So.
The last thing I wanted to ask you, maybe a little bit outside the space of what you're doing, but I was reading your dissertation and I saw the piece about the Oxford group, which was news to me. And as I was reading your dissertation, I was also rereading Jung, everything that's been translated into English. And every comment that I came across in Jung about the Oxford group was negative.
That's right.
So I was wondering what you had to say about that.
Well, thank you for reminding me. Remember, AA's got, uses Jung's name, bandies Jung's name a lot, as though he ratified AA. So I brought a copy of the letter here, and you can read the letter, and there's not a single sentence in there where he's saying he's supporting AA. Okay, the analogy is this: I had an uncle who, in Hong Kong, who had a picture of Ronald Reagan on his wall, saying, "Dear so-and-so, congratulations," right? And I went back and I said, my uncle's awesome, right? Even Ronald Reagan writes to him. Then I found out that anyone can get the same letter. Anyone can get this letter. You just have to write to the White House to get it. So Bill Wilson wrote Jung a letter. And Jung wrote back saying, yes, the idea is still, spiritus contra spiritum, right? But he didn't say, congratulations, I heard about what you guys did, because this was available to him at the time. And he said, I really honor what you're doing. He kept completely quiet. He said the answer is, spiritus contra spiritum. And the whole books have been written about how Jung and A, basically it says A is effective because Jung said so. But if you read what Jung says about individuation, right? If you read what his comments on the Oxford group, he would say this is a medieval mindset.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He says it's a medieval mindset. Right? The entire books have been written about Jung and AA. But they always omit these references. Right? 11 of AA's 12 steps come directly from the Oxford group. Yeah. And the only reason why the Oxford group fizzled out was that the leader, Frank Buckman, he stepped on like social doo-doo in the 1930s by saying how great the Nazi Party was. So the whole thing disappeared. But the Oxford group and AA are pretty much synonymous. Right? So we get an idea of what Jung said. So about this, I don't know, I'll piss a lot of people off by saying that though. Because Jung and AA seem to have gone hand in hand. But Jung called this he laughed at people. He actually, there's one section where he said, this guy's talking about his alcoholic experiences, he's repeating them over and over again, and soon he lost his spiritual feeling, and now they come to me.
Yeah.
Right? And then here's another thing about our transpersonal books. Corbett actually wrote, right? The idea of having this paternal figure, this magical paternal figure, it would be hard to keep a straight face. So I'm not saying there's anything against it, but I'm just saying that there's a disconnect between transpersonal psychology and AA, which nobody has ever bothered to fully examine or question. But I did it because there was a part of me, and I have to admit, I wouldn't say I was right. All the time. And I admit it. That's why I did it. That's why I did it. Okay, I admit it.
It's the transparency of the researcher.
But I did change.
Thank you.
Peter, I want to kind of look at what you've actually come up with. So
Sure.
I'd like you to go in this way, if you could. You've spent a lot of time talking about AA and classical transpersonal.
Right.
But what you've come up with really is a combination between some aspects of the transpersonal and participatory
Yes.
spirituality of Farrar. I'm wondering if you could talk about those two things and what you've come up with now as something that you really do have to offer to that might be much more effective, or the beginning of something that would be effective. I'd like to hear it and just kind of lay it out simply for me.
Sure. Okay. Remember, Wilbur's model was the 4 quadrants, right? How Horry came up with this model, it was a natural extension of Wilbur's model, actually. Right? The two don't like each other very much, but one was obviously, now looking back, it would be obvious why. Wilbur's model, although he said it was the 4 quadrants, right? What he actually meant personal change was the top 2. The combination of science and religion, right? The combination of science and religion was, the marriage of science and religion is what he wrote a lot about. And in today's treatment paradigm, It is a combination of science and religion, right? It's a disease, and we use spirituality to fix it, right? So we see the marriage, and yet it's incomplete. And Jorge will say this is why it's incomplete. Where is the social and cultural in all this, right? So Jorge's
The other two quadrants.
the other two quadrants, where are they? And it wasn't just Jorge that said that. Recently, some two Hungarian researchers looked at Wilber's stuff, and they said, but they looked at Wilber's stuff 15 years ago, and they said, yeah, where's the social? Where's the social? They were social scientists, and we say we don't see any social stuff. You're talking about internal transformation. You're talking about individual transformation, right? So Jorge came up with a much more social, with a much more social inclusive model, right? It was like a kung fu move. In one move, he did what Wilber did in 16, right? So, in a nutshell, here it is again, right? Think of recovery or think of addiction as an event that you attend. When we think of that, right, then we get all the four quadrants together. We get everything moving inside our heads, right, without having to be clunky. So in this model, right, I got the help from Bruce Alexander, who's a social scientist, who's been talking for years. We need to have a social solution. It's not just a disease. It's not just a disease, and it's just not intrapsychic religion or spiritual change. We also need the social supports for this. And how he recommends social support is what he calls a process of psychosocialization, right? We get people who are in addiction to be involved with their community, right? To do community stuff like go in with the ecological movements or help in those places like I talked about in Church Street. Get them involved with the community. Now, you might say AA, well, what about AA? Right? AA, you meet a lot of friends. But it's very limited because AA tells you, you're not part of the community. You are someone who's forever, and there's no cure, forever destined to be broken. You're not part of the community. So it estranges people actually from the community. It's a limited recovery. I mean, some friends are better than none, but it's not a full recovery back into society and culture. Right? Think about this. The most addictive drug known to humans, right, is what? Cigarettes. Cigarettes, right? Any addict will tell you that cigarettes are the most addictive substance, right, known to them. And yet people don't say, I'm still a smoker. I'm a smoker after they quit smoking. They're no longer an addict, right? People quit smoking on their own. But any addict in treatment will tell you that smoking is the most addictive substance known to them. And yet they recover on their own and they don't call themselves addicts for the rest of their lives, right? In 12 Step Groups, you do it as a badge of honor to identify with this problem, and we know this from Wilber, that if we identify with the problem, we don't move ahead from it. We don't move away from this, right? We continually identify like it's some badge of honor, right? So yes, so how this model would help was it's the third section where we try to encourage them to join in with the community, psychosocialize them. And that was the missing element.
Okay, that was the only missing element? I want a little bit more.
The
four quadrants, and for ours impact. And then what would you do? Make it personalizable, not just necessarily for you.
Sure.
I want to see a person, what would you do with them? You know, all of them model.
So I listed the three areas here. Right? So it would be a process of intrapsychic change, right?
And how would that take place?
Either through Jungian analytical psychology or psychosynthesis.
Those two.
Yeah, well, I listed those two as models of interest, but it could also be.
But you listed those two because you would feel that those two are highly effective.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also from a transpersonal, they come from they're uniquely transpersonal. They're unique to our field, right? They're effective, and although there's no evidence, and unfortunately, there's very little evidence to suggest this. Psychotherapy ranks lowest. Any kind of psychotherapy ranks lowest on the list of effective treatments. But if you do have a client coming to you, right, intrapsychic change is an important part of the four quadrants. So yes, intrapsychic change through psychosynthesis.
Okay, good. What's the next one?
This next one is a balanced mix of evidence-based injunctions,
Like?
right? Motivational interviewing, shock treatments are actually quite high. Shock treatments are quite high, right? Books rank 7th in the most effective, right? They call that bibliotherapy.
Yeah.
Bibliotherapy.
Yeah.
right? So I had a list of 48 of them ranked according to evidence of how they demonstrated it, and we can. But I also listed next to them I, it, or we, next to each of these treatments. I'm sorry, I forgot to.
It's okay, just tell us, because it's very interesting.
Yeah, the list of 48 oh gosh, I don't have it here.
You don't have to tell all 48, just tell us something about it.
Well,
Like you are. I like what you're doing.
okay, two researchers, and one of them was very pro AA. They sat down and said, we need to make a list of what science has shown to be the most effective, treatments, right? The way they did this was kind of complicated, but they tried to be fair, and they weighed all this stuff down according to the strength of the methodology used, right? The random, where the studies were random, and so they had a list of 48 treatments. Now, the reason why they did this is that they were in shock when they compiled this list. They said that you have to go halfway down before the first one is used in treatment, in regular treatment. Right, so I've compiled a list in my dissertation, and you know, they even say, look, okay, there's no single treatment that by far is the best. They say that.
Say, if you were teaching, what would be your like 3 or 4 treatments that you think are so powerful? I know that they might be different for other people.
Definitely, psychosynthesis. I would say definitely psychosynthesis.
No, but for the number 2, for the second quadrant.
The
second thing.
exercise, meditation, drumming circles, right? Holotropic breath work. A lot of these transpersonal practices, which were called spiritual, they actually have a secular form, right? CBT uses mindfulness meditation, but they don't try to convert, right? I can do yoga, which is highly useful in reducing stress, right? But I don't have to convert to Krishna, right? I don't have to convert. Right? So a lot of Eastern spiritual practices can be applied, right? And we can find where they belong to on the list. For example, holotropic breath work would come under, you can say it comes under hypnosis. Right? So yeah, so I'm not encouraging a movement away. In fact, a lot of these things that we're studying here are highly useful, but we have to place them in the context of addiction studies. We can't just say, well, they're useful. Well, why are they useful? Right? I remember at Southwestern College, this woman was drumming around my head, and she actually said something that changed my mind. She said, this will stop me from thinking. You know, she was right. I stopped thinking for a second. Right? She kept on banging the drums and get away from me, but it actually worked. But she actually explained it in a way.
Give me the third quadrant.
The third quadrant would be volunteer work.
I see.
Would be volunteer work, but we move out of the ethnocentricity of just helping people in AA, right? It's a very from the ethnocentric, we move on to the world-centric, to the cosmocentric, right? We make a transition, but we no longer just try to help people who only think like us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and away from that, this is the treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like the best about what you're talking about. You complexify and diversify it.
Right, really diversify it, but there has to be something, a theory underlying it. So we use the transpersonal, we use the 3 things that are transpersonal psychology, right? Transformation, transcendence, and wholeness, right? It puts a head onto the body.
Okay.
I think we're going to open it up for all of you now to ask questions. In a couple of minutes, the 3 of us will step out. But you can ask questions and get into a dialogue, and if you want to show your video game, you can do that too.
Oh, great.
So you're the leader now.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
We can watch the things.
Yeah.
This one I said. Oh, I'm sorry, I just have to get the volume up on this on my computer real quickly. Shoot. Heidi, is there a volume for this?
It's probably on your desktop.
I
Yeah,
got
there you
it.
go.
Okay, just real quickly and then. Wait, it's right here.
People in that community, what would you say to them if they were here right now? I wouldn't.
I'm sorry, it's just too loud. Let's just put it down one more time. You guys are stuck in. Okay, there we go. Yeah, great.
People in the community, what would you say to them if they were here right now? I wouldn't say a single word to them. I would listen to what.
I'm sorry, let me get this thing view.
Hit the big play button.
Oh yeah, gotcha. Thank you.
There we go.
What would you say to them if they were here right now? I wouldn't say a single word to them. I would listen to what they have to say, and that's what no one did. I wouldn't say a single word to them. I would listen to what they have to say, and that's what no one did.
It's a very, very bad, bad. Children waiting for the day they feel good. Happy birthday, happy birthday. And I feel the way that every child should sit and listen, sit and listen. Went to school and I was very nervous. No one knew me, no one knew me. Hello teacher, tell me what's my lesson. Look right through me, look right through me. And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very bad.
I just wanted to play that.
Thank you so much. So we can open it up to the group.
Great, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free. Yes, young lady in the back.
So much of what you said touched really deeply. It touched into this idea that that our society has about disposable people. And I wonder if you questioned at all the assumption that addiction is searching for transcendence rather than dealing with pain. And because
Yes.
it seems like at the core of addiction there's pain there.
That's right.
Whether it's pain of isolation or boredom or past history, whatever it is, that
Sure.
there is this pain that's not being addressed and dealt with. And so I wonder how your suggestions for possible more integrative treatment models could actually begin with assessing what is the core pain.
That'd be great. In fact, well, that's really well said. Right. So, Jungian psychotherapy would probably be no psychosynthesis also. They would both deal with that. Right. Psychotherapy does to a certain extent, right? But also the pain of isolation would be to get them back to feel a part of the community. This is where kindness is very important. Is that we try not to exclude people, right? to be inclusive and make them feel like they're part of the human race again, right? But not limited to, to being an addict for the rest of their lives, right? Kindness.
Well, and sometimes pain is, I don't know how I'm gonna pay my bills and put enough, food on the table to feed my kids.
Yeah, for sure.
Pain shows up in so many different ways.
Right, that's absolutely right. Wilber's 4 quadrants actually address this, and he would say that having skills, learning new skills, learning how to pay your bills is an important part of recovery, right? This right, which is on par, on balance with spiritual, with intrapsychic change, right? The external, in Wilber's model, all 4 quadrants are interrelated. Not any quadrant is more important than the other. Right? They're all interrelated. Anything that happens in one quadrant will affect the other 3 quadrants. Right? But we can't. But this is what you said is actually very important, and this is a primary quadrant. In AA, they'll tell you that's an excuse. You're using an excuse. You have God, and that's all you need. Right?
Well, that supports a certain economic and social strata, right?
That's right.
It completely disregards poverty.
Right.
Which it doesn't matter how many jobs you have, or if you know how to pay your bills, if you don't actually have the economic outlet to pay them, then it's,
Right.
It's a moot point.
I remember a year ago, 2 years ago, Adrian gave his talk. I don't know if you saw it. Adrian, our colleague, right? He was blaming the U.S. government, and at that time I hadn't done research yet. So I said, "Well, what do you propose the U.S. government does?" And then he got blank. Well, maybe stop the incarceration first of all for drug-related offenses, right? Offer comprehensive treatment as to how people can get back into the community of some kind. And there are programs like that teach people, try to teach people to trade and get them back out there. The good thing about being an addict and creditor is that eventually they stop calling. Eventually, if you still don't have a roof, the creditors will stop calling. I don't know how I know this. Yes?
Congratulations, Peter. I'm really, really happy to witness this work of yours. I've, seen you through the years, really working hard at it. So to finally have it right here is really impressive. So I do have a few.
Sure.
I don't know if the questions or something. Basically, the 2. Your committee asked you what would be the answer to the problem. You say kindness.
Yeah.
So kindness seems to be, if not the cornerstone or the backbone of what you're actually trying to argue for. But I don't have a big understanding of the 12-step or AA. Never been, so I don't know.
Right. Sure.
But what I'm hearing from the AA, it seems like kindness, maybe it's not like a genuine kindness, I don't know, but it seems like the AA is built on kindness, where people are actually, from what I see on here, nice to each other, trying to be supportive, trying to help you through the steps and all that. So is that kindness different from the kindness that you're talking about? So that's one level of my question. The other one is more technical.
Yes.
You mentioned the 3, the integrating transpersonal perspective on recovery. Stage 1, transcendence. Stage 3, wholeness.
Stage 2 wholeness.
Stage 2, wholeness,
Yes.
and stage 3, transformation. And you also talk about how that actually will be implemented through 1, intrapsychic change.
Yes.
2, motivational interviewing,
Right.
and all that, and 3, community volunteering.
Yes.
So I was wondering where you model, where do you situate your model vis-a-vis the existing classical model? Because when I see those 3 steps,
Right.
transcendence and
Right.
wholeness and
Right.
all that, I'm trying to see where does the classical model fit,
Yeah.
and where does yours,
Sure.
how do you differentiate face to face, yours and the existing
The
model?
existing classical model is the first phase, transcendence. It's all about transcendence, right? But the other 2 stages, it was written before the other 2 stages, before Wilber came along, and before Jorge came along. So it doesn't really have everything. The most important thing is for you to have that intrapsychic change. That's what the classical model talks about, and we will facilitate this through NOSDs, and a lot of people here are doing research on the intrapsychic ways of doing it. The idea is this: once you have an intrapsychic change, then you're on your way, right? What the second model, what wholeness says is that you can't just have intrapsychic change. You need all these other areas, right? In your and the third one is that we need to stress the social.
No.
Right? And the first one is about kindness. About kindness is AA. I mean, I have a lot of friends in AA, and AA is also being kind to me. But how about without the condescension? Right? Without the condescension. Without I was once like you. Oh, you poor selfish guy. I was like you. Right? Because the whole thing teaches them you're a selfish, self-centered guy. Right? To begin with. Right? So when you walk in the rooms, right? There's a veneer. It's a veneer of kindness and one of judgment, automatic judgment. And they say to you, you know how an addict lies? He said that their thing is he talks or something, right? Or he opens his mouth. This is how an addict lies. Or the other great one. There's only one thing you need to change: everything. So when I hear that, I'm like, wait a minute. You know, everyone laughs, right? Everyone in the room laughs, right? There's the third one. There is a God, and you're not it, and everyone laughs. Well, the first part of the proposition, you know, is questionable, but the second is kind of mean. But the second thing about what we're saying to people, right? We bombard them with platitudes, right? Or, you know, kind of pithy sayings. You need to change one thing and everything. But what we're actually saying to somebody is, there's nothing good about you. You got to change everything. Right? We only look at the weaknesses. We don't look at the strengths. We talk about our defects of characters, but we never acknowledge any strengths the person might have. It just doesn't exist in the 12 steps. It doesn't acknowledge any strengths. It's all about restitution of harm that you've done.
So since you're bringing, I don't want it to be two ways, but
Sure.
Since you're bringing in community, so I feel like I'm involved in an addict's life, because you said, how do you fix or help the individual when you send him back to community? So it has to be like a collective.
Right.
So if I'm then involved, how do you answer, maybe it's a stereotype, but I don't know, the fact that it is said that the addict does not have a friend. The real friend of the addict is the drug.
The lover.
Yeah, so I as a member of the community, how do I help the addict when actually the addict can lie in any ways possible and be the nicest person on earth when the reality is somewhere else?
Okay, that's very specific to a person, but how we can also help is, okay, I use this as an example, right? When we buy a drug, right, we have to stop and think, right? This drug I'm buying comes from Mexico, and Mexico, right, they have all this horrific violence going on, right? Am I actually contributing to it? If I'm making jokes about, let's say, women's appearances, right? Am I contributing to this? Am I contributing to the stuff that leads to you know, that stuff, right? So to watch, be mindful and just be kind. I'm not, but I'm trying, right? I'm trying, right? Just realize the interconnectedness of everything, right? I've also contributed. That's why I said in the beginning, I've contributed to this before in the past, right? From my way of thinking, that it's one of purely individual responsibility. You got yourself in, get yourself out, right? I've contributed to this in the past. Yes.
Yes, you were talking about kindness.
Yes.
And how do you show kindness so that it is not perceived as condescension? How do you show it? Sometimes you show kindness, you show love, and but it is very easy for the recipient to look on it as there's some patronage. This is a patronizing attitude, there's condescension. So how would you deal with that? How would you show kindness to people without their thinking that you are patronizing them?
I really couldn't answer that. I really couldn't answer that. I really can't. I don't know. I can't say it just for the other person.
Yeah.
I don't have no idea. It depends on the person.
Depends on the
Recipient. It depends on the recipient. And also the
showing it, or it depends on the recipient.
I'm really not that clear on this, but I used the example that they had in the AA, right? That the way that they had it. We love you because you were what we used to be, right? You remind us of what we used to be, which is all these negative things, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that
Can I just answer one thing, right? Or I did this to my daughter once. I shouldn't have done this, but this is an example of motivational interviewing. She came up and said, "Dad, tell Mom I don't want to take piano lessons anymore." So I thought about this, and I said, "Okay, Natalie." I said to the mom, I said, "How much are you paying for the piano lessons?" Like $35 an hour. I said, "Natalie, can you play me what you learned, right? And how many lessons did you take?" So she did the old one-handed, right? I said, "How many hours was that?" 40. I said to her, "Natalie, you never have to take the piano again. You don't have to take one single lesson." And then she looked at me, right? All confused, right? I did what she asked me to do, right? But it was kind of a mean way of doing it, right? But motivational interviewing also uses this, right? Motivational interviewing is quite smart. If you go up to the motivational interviewer and say, "I don't really have the strength to do this, I can't do this," they'll say, from what you've told me, yeah, I guess you're right." Right? And then you sit on the other end, you're like, did this guy just agree with me? And I want to prove him wrong. And that's, But yes, Alan.
Well, I was going to think acceptance is one really big form of kindness, and the AA thing is like a group, right? And the people like who suicided fell out of that group by doing that. So they were the other. They became the other, and they could be again like unaccepted and looked down on and so on. And so I think a lot of it is about acceptance. And it seems to me like this business that you're like AA is an institution. It's a big thing.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's you can find something to help you anywhere in this country anyway to just walk in the door and they're going to let you
There's
sit
a
down.
lot of great things about AA, and I wrote
Yeah.
about this. It wasn't all negative, but I actually didn't have the time to talk about the positive aspects of AA, which I did talk about.
But this thing that, sprung from your own head, this business of like working in groups and, delivering them electronically to reach just about anybody in the world,
Right.
any place, any time, is almost like what could become a replacement, a thing that is needed in the place it's needed, at the time it's needed. And the people that are gathering in that single group would accept each other and be there is no other there because they're all dealing with the same problem and they have a guide that's aware of that problem and working in that problem and it sort of clears the slate for those people so they would be more successful in their addiction or whatever other problem they happen to have. It's just it's just interesting that you have a solution there somewhere, I think.
Well, the three of us have had a serious discussion, and all three of us greatly appreciate your work, Peter, and we'd like to welcome you into the esteemed world of doctors.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to give each one of the committee members just a moment to congratulate Peter. We'll start with you, Doctor.
I hope you're as honored as I feel to have been part of this.
Yeah.
This is the greatest, for me, the greatest display of passion that I've ever seen in a dissertation defense or defense of this sort. And what I'm struck by that we would know that some of you might not know, and it's just an interesting experience, Peter, because you took all of that tremendous amount of passion and anger and hope and that we got to see here, and I'm thank you. And that all got channeled into an incredibly strongly, articulately written piece of work. And if you can imagine everything that you just viewed up here, put academically correctly into this, it's a powerhouse document. So to be able to experience that, and honestly to experience this in the same way in person wouldn't have been that interesting. Be like, yeah, I read it. I know the findings. You can show me a PowerPoint if you want, but I read it. So really, this is an incredibly multifaceted experience of Dr. Peter Eng, and thank you.
I was mentioning when we were talking that when I would practice psychotherapy, it was standard training for me, and I think it's still standard training for most psychotherapists, that when we have clients who, and I had individual and group and family, and you know, when they have, when they struggle with addiction, that we refer them to AA. And, I remember wondering why so few of them, if any of them, actually failed to go without relapsing. Over years of referrals, you know. So when I read the first draft of your dissertation, it made me angry about the training that I had received, but it made me appropriately angry, you know. And it also made me wish, and kind of sad too, that I had not received better alternatives. So I not only want to thank you, but I want to express just a wish that's just my own stuff. So if it doesn't resonate, totally dismiss it, you know. And my wish would be that you, after a suitable period of resting up and breathing and going, oh, I really did it, and all that, you know, all the things you're going to go through after this, that at some point, if you still have a lot of passion for this, that you train the trainers, that you educate the educators, so that they get that this thing over here, at least for most, well, maybe not most, I don't know, but for some people, it's unworkable, it's broken, you know, and that there are alternatives. So I hope you at least think about that.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you. I'm gonna have a drink after this.
I was actually going to tell an anecdote involving alcohol, and I decided to skip it. So. But maybe it was in there.
So, Peter, thank you so much. It was a wonderful experience. I have to tell you that it was shocking to me. Peter worked on this, his dissertation, for a long, long time, and I didn't hear it all from him. And I was thinking, I was just getting ready to call him and follow up, thinking, gosh, I hope he hasn't fallen off the wagon here, you know, in the sense of a lot of ABDs, you know, all but dissertation, do not complete their dissertation. It is very, very common because it is difficult to complete a dissertation. You're alone.
Yeah.
You have to write a book. There's nobody there really to help you. You have to do it you have to put one foot in front of the other. One woman, when I was writing my dissertation, told me that you just put one foot in front of the other, someday you'll be done. And that actually helped me. So I hadn't heard from him. And then one day he came and he dropped the whole thing on my lap. And I thought, oh no! Oh my God. Oh my God. I was so worried. What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do now? You know? He hasn't talked to me all these months, and now he's giving me this whole thing, and it's complete. And so I was a little angry and freaked out also, because so I let him have it a little bit. But you know, honestly, when I read it and worked my way through, I was astounded. This is one of the very best dissertations I've read.
Wow.
It is so well researched. It is so logical. It is a logical progression. Highly researched. He has read everything. And he incorporates it perfectly. All of the quotes that he uses are just at the right time to back up what he's saying. It's an exquisite work. And so I thought, well, all right.
Yes.
Excellent, very, very well done. I certainly hope that you publish this. When you're ready, most people never want to see their dissertation after they're done. But this is an excellent work, excellent. And he has something to give to the community that is so valuable. So